I'm an economics supplemental instructor. I've been doing SI for about 6 semesters, and this is part of a series of video tutorials to walk through some of the historically difficult economics concepts. So the first concept we're going to cover today is the idea of comparative advantage. And with comparative advantage, there are kind of two related concepts that I'll be talking about in this same video. They're the ideas of absolute advantage and opportunity cost. So first, absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is just the idea that given, as you can see from this little matrix, given the same amount of resources, one person can produce more than another person. So if we're talking about cookies and papers, given, say, the same time block, say 5 hours, Jack can produce 8 papers and Jill can produce 6. So given the same amount of resources, that 5-hour time block, Jack can write more papers than Jill can. The same thing with cookies. Given 5 hours, Jack can produce 2 batches of cookies, Jill can produce 3. Given the same resources, that 5-hour time block, Jill can produce more cookies. So that's absolute advantage. The next idea, then this is the main concept we're talking about in this video, is comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is the idea that you should specialize in whatever you have the lowest opportunity cost in. And this brings us to opportunity cost, which is just the idea that there's a price for everything that you do. And the price of what you do is what you give up, is the next best thing that you could be doing. So in this example, we're talking about cookies and papers. So the opportunity cost of baking cookies is writing a paper. And the opportunity cost of writing a paper is making cookies. You give up cookies to write a paper, you give up writing a paper to make cookies. So that's the idea of opportunity cost. Comparative advantage, like I said, is the idea that you should produce whatever you have the lowest opportunity cost in. So for me, it's easiest to think about this in terms of 1, when I'm trying to decide who has the lowest opportunity cost. So let's take cookies. I want to know how many papers Jack gives up to make 1 extra batch of cookies. So I divide this by 2, and because I've divided this by 2, I need to do the same thing to this side. And then I would divide this by 3 to get 1. And I would do the same thing here. So to make 1 extra batch of cookies, Jack gives up 4 papers. To make 1 extra batch of cookies, Jill gives up 2 papers. Because Jill gives up fewer papers per batch of cookies that she makes, she has the comparative advantage in cookies because her opportunity cost of papers is lower than Jack's. So the nice thing about comparative advantage is that unlike absolute advantage, if you have a comparative advantage in one thing, you cannot have it in the other because you can't have a lower opportunity cost for both goods. So we know that Jill's comparative advantage is cookies, so we could just say Jack's has to be papers because Jill's is cookies. But that answer is probably not going to fly on a test, so let's go through and do this again and clean up the numbers a little bit. So again, it's easier for me to think of this in terms of 1. So now we're looking at comparative advantage in papers. So if Jack writes 1 paper, he gives up 1/4 of a batch of cookies. If Jill writes 1 paper, she gives up half a batch of cookies. Jack has the lowest opportunity cost. He gives up fewer cookies per paper, so he has comparative advantage in papers. And again, we can say, if you know the comparative advantage of one person, you also know the comparative advantage of the other person, but it's always good to know how to go through and do this mathematically to show it on a test or on a quiz or something like that.